Welcome to Inside Sim Racing. I'm Billy Strange, and in this edition of Test Drive, well, I'm doing something a little different. We're checking out Raceroom, and more specifically, per request from our community, we are going over, or rather I am going over, my force feedback settings. Also, I'm running the Audi R18 TDI Ultra around Spa, so I've got some car setup tips for that as well if you are interested. Before we get to that, though, some other housekeeping items to get through. I am running a T300 RS base on a 599 Evo rim, Ricmotech GT Pro 1 pedals with a GT Omega ART chassis, a field of 15 cars including myself. AI is set to 115%. So before I get into the general force feedback settings, what I would first encourage you to do, if you haven't done so already, is since the latest update, the big update that they had in Raceroom, I would create a new profile and reset all of your force feedback settings. I noticed it's something that I had to do. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Empty Box did. An Empty Box and Gamer Muscle have complimented Raceroom on their new force feedback, and I as well. I think the force feedback is fantastic now. I think it does a really good job of communicating what the car is doing. So, with that said, now that you've reset everything, of course, get your force feedback on. I leave my force feedback intensity at 100%, no smoothing, and I don't like a heavy force feedback spring. Once again, that is a personal preference. I don't know what it was at default, so I just prefer, I know I did move it down, and I do prefer 20%, and then I also killed any force feedback dampening, just to give the wheel a good amount of feel. Okay, now we're on to the steering force settings. Steering force I have set at 75%. I think that was default. But I'm not positive, so if I did change it, I like it at the 75%. I upped the minimum force feedback force 20%. I believe it started at 10. It just seemed to be a little bit more alive in my hands. Understeer is at 60. Vertical load is at 100. Lateral force is 50. Steering rack is at 100. I notice a little bit with the steering rack, not a whole lot, so I just left it up. Lateral force, sometimes it can feel a little too heavy, so that's at 50. That might be default. I think I did play with it though. Vertical load is at default at 100. And understeer, I have it 60 just because I don't want it to snap on me too much. It's very unsettling, and for me, you know, with the race cars that I've driven, that's very unnatural feeling. I've never felt a car that just snap understeers. I've felt it, you know, quickly go to understeer, but there's, you know, sensations that you're not getting when you're doing sim racing that you get in a car. You can usually feel when you're going to start understeering. Unfortunately, you don't have that seat of the pants feel here, so for me, you know, it's a personal preference thing. Your mileage may vary. I just prefer the understeer in that 60 to 50% range, just so you don't get that snap understeer. And last, we get to the actual force feedback effect settings. So once again, the slip effect is typically something you're going to feel with the front end. You might feel a little with the back end of the car, but once again, you're not getting that seat of the pants feel. 75%, which I believe was default. If not, then yes, I did change it to 75. I don't remember off the top of my head. But yes, 75% seemed to be a happy medium for me. Once again, you know, getting it too strong kind of encourages that real quick loss in the front end, and some people might like it that way. It feels very unnatural when it does that, so 75% seemed to be a good balance. These next three, engine, curb, and shift effect, and the two vibration ones, these are very much personal preference. For me, I don't care for a lot of engine vibration in my wheel. It becomes distracting. The curb vibrations, once again, if they get too strong, they become annoying to me. And shift effect, I just want just a hint of it. I don't want it. I've had it so where it's literally trying to jerk the wheel out of my hand. That's too strong for me. Once again, all, you know, the different race cars and stuff that I've driven, you feel a little bit, but it's not as pronounced as they make it out to be. So once again, that is just a personal preference and immersion deal for the individual user. Those are just my settings. I prefer it there. I don't need to know all that stuff. That stuff is irrelevant to me in the grand scheme of things. So kept them on at a very low rate just so that I knew they were there, but they're not telling me anything. The curb vibration gives me a little bit, just saying, hey, you're up on the curb, but I don't need it to try and distract from my steering. I just need a hint of it. I just need to know that it's there. And the last part of your force feedback is actually in the car settings itself. So when you go into a race, there is a steering setup option where you can adjust your wheel range, steering lock, and then your force feedback multiplier. So the wheel range is telling you what, how much degrees of rotation you should have, and it's also giving you the steering lock, and that is per each individual car. This is always going to change between cars. Then you have the force feedback multiplier. Now in this particular instance, I didn't need it multiplied at all, because in the next little piece I will show you the actual force feedback meter. So I didn't need any extra force feedback, but if you watched my Mustang, my IMSA Mustang, or my 300ZX, I actually bumped those up. The Mustang was going from 2.1 to 3.0, and the 300ZX was 2.0 or 2.1 to 2.5. That force feedback, and we'll click to that. There we go. Now this is just a clip, this is just a screenshot of it. It actually scrolls. So what I did was, once I had my general settings like I wanted, I turned this on while I was practicing and watched to see if it was clipping. So I basically wanted to keep that green line staying between those other two lines. If it goes above the red, it starts clipping, and then weird stuff starts happening with your force feedback. So for the most part, I needed it to stay between those two lines, and if it wasn't getting there, that's why I would raise up the force feedback in the car setting only. That force feedback multiplier per car is fantastic. And again, I echo the sentiments of like Gamer Muscle. The force feedback in this game now is fantastic. With that, we're coming to the end of the race here, so we'll switch to a replay, and I'll also go over the car settings very quickly that I did with the R18. Okay, so first thing I messed with was the aero, because I know that there's a lot of long sections, high speed in this track, some high speed sweeping turns, so I wanted to make sure I was getting the least amount of drag as possible. So I ended up taking the wing down. I think it starts at either 14 or 15. I went as low as 12. That seemed to unsettle the car some. Through Eau Rouge, so I left it I put it to 13, and then I took the front splitter down to 1. After running a full 8 minutes hard like this, I probably could have put it back to 2, but it felt very darty for me to begin with while I was learning the car. So if you feel like the car is darty, all of a sudden it's turning too quick, too early, it's unhooking the back end, that front splitter makes a big difference. So I put it on 1 click. That's what I ran the race with. I would probably try 2 clicks now just to see if I could get used to that turn-in, because it does have a little push to it. Alright, the next adjustments I made were on the differential. Power was at 75, and the problem I had with that is coming out of the hairpin or through the little switchback or chicane or whatever you want to call it just before the start-finish line, and the really low speed turns, which there's only, 2 or 3, it was way too easy, even with the traction control on, which is standard for this car. It just lit the tires up and I would spin out no matter, I'd have to feel like I was going so slow, and I was actually losing time because I was afraid to step on the throttle. So I kicked it down, ended up being at 55. Just doesn't give you that brute wheel spin coming off the turn. Makes it a little more manageable coming off the corner. And then I actually upped or lessen the coast so that it would rotate a little more on entry, because it was causing a slight push off the throttle. So when you lift off, it would actually push going into the turn, messing with the coast. I think we were at 30, backed it down to 25, and it actually helped it rotate into the turn. So that seemed to work pretty well, and I never changed the preload. The preload was fine. That just means the attack at which everything comes in at, I didn't feel that it needed to be messed with at all. Onto the brakes. Lessen the brake pressure just a hair next. I was locking up the brakes too easy, especially when the tires were not up to temperature. So from 95 to 93, just gave it a little less lockup. You can hear in the video when I was driving, I still had a little bit of lockup, but that's okay because I was pressing pretty hard. I just didn't want them to lock up so easy. And then brake bias once again to get the car to rotate just a little better. I went from 54 in the front to 53% in the front, so put 1% more in the rear. And in those instances where I hit the brakes and needed to hit the brakes hard, it helped rotate the car instead of pushing the front end. Very quick front and rear suspension. I didn't change the toe in either one. Those felt just fine. I changed the bump. I softened them from 8 to 7 just so the car would dive and react a little quicker front to back. I think I did soften the car just a hair. I don't remember. I know they're not stock, but those are my settings. I don't remember if I went 1 or 2 clicks in the front. And I know I changed the rear some, but I don't know if I put it back to stock. But anyway, that's the setting at 1251. That's where it felt the best. I want to say the camber was at 1.7, but anyway, the rear camber I messed with and came up with 1.6. I think I took some out just so the car would rotate a little better in the center of the turn. Didn't touch the front. And then I did lower the car. Spa is not a very rough track. When you lower the car, you are getting rid of some transitional weight, so that can change your back to front and side to side, or your lateral grip. That comes with forces when the weight is transferring. But when you lower the car, you got better center of gravity. It reacts a little quicker, and once again, I wasn't worried about the car bottoming out. So I got it low. It's just 1 click above its lowest setting, and it seemed to work pretty good there. Roll bars, once again, I softened those. Those are my settings. You can check that out. And then I won't bother to show you the gear ratio. I did elongate the gears just so I had some more top end down the straightaway, since I took some aero out of the car. And in the draft, as you were able to see, I wasn't topping out. And we were actually, that's where I was gaining the most time, was in those long stretches. And then, you know, just adjust your fuel accordingly. Once again, I lowered that car because I wasn't running a lot of fuel in there. You may want to change that if you're running a long race along with your springs and that sort of thing. But I was running, you know, I only put 7 laps of fuel in the thing, trying to get the car as light and as nimble as possible. And that's it. Hopefully that was helpful. Once again, those setup tips are just suggestions. Hopefully it gets you in the ballpark. If you don't have a similar driving style than me, you're probably going to go, this is crap. This is just a starting point. Hopefully this is like a launching pad for those that could use the help or were missing something. And then you kind of develop your own setups from there with your own driving style. So thanks so much for watching. It was the R18, once I got it set up, was a great car to drive. You definitely had to drive it hard, though. This car requires you not to baby the car. I mean, get in and out of the turn, be on the gas. Otherwise, it does not react well. But it was a good car to drive. It was kind of iffy when I first started trying. I was like, this doesn't really feel like a prototype. But once I changed those settings, especially through here, I mean, it's very easy to drive through the fast parts of the track instead of feeling unsettled. So stay tuned to Inside Sim Racing for more race room coverage, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Take care.